Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer and unpack what I think is a massive, incredibly fascinating contradiction hidden right inside the brutal airline industry. The history of aviation is basically just a graveyard filled with companies that once looked, well, completely unstoppable. A single mistake, a sudden spike in fuel prices, a random economic crisis, any of these can literally destroy decades of a rock-solid reputation and just wipe out profits overnight. Yet somehow, one of America's most successful and enduring airlines came from an environment that actively tried to destroy it. So today, we're looking at the story of Alaska Airlines and unpacking exactly how this incredible underdog actually survived the giants.
Think about it. Major airlines are usually built in the absolute easiest places to operate. They set up shop near massive financial centers, enormous populations, giant international mega airports, and, crucially, relatively stable weather. But Alaska Airlines, they were born in a place where roads literally disappear into nothing. We are talking about pure wilderness, weather that can turn deadly in just a matter of minutes, and totally remote communities separated by hundreds of miles of ice and mountains. For folks living there, fly wasn't some luxury vacation, right? It was absolute basic survival.
So that brings us to the crucial question we're investigating today. How on earth did a tiny regional operation, built for the absolute toughest environment on the planet, manage to grow and outlast massive aviation empires when the giants fell? Like, what was their secret? Well, to figure that out, we really have to go back to the very beginning.
Part 1. Forged in the Frontier. Looking at their history, they had incredibly humble, almost unbelievable beginnings. Back in 1932, a guy named Linnaeus Mac McGee founded McGee Airways in Anchorage with exactly one single aircraft. Yeah, literally just one plane. From there, it was a brutal climb. By 1944, through a series of mergers, they finally adopted the name Alaska Airlines. But, the ultimate test of their foundation wouldn't actually come from the crazy weather, but from Washington, D.C. In 1978, the Airline Deregulation Act completely flipped the industry on its head, ripping away government protections and throwing absolutely everyone into a cutthroat, free-market battlefield. Now, the core mindset that prepared them for that battlefield was forged by early Alaskan bush pilots. I'm talking about pilots landing on gravel fields, frozen rivers, and beaches, often with zero navigation systems. Insane, right? But they quickly learned a fundamental truth. You do not fight the volatility of the environment because you will lose every time. Instead, you adapt to it. You respect it. And that deep-rooted culture of adaptability, that essentially became the DNA of the entire company. Their hidden advantage here was that they weren't just selling flights to tourists. They were building deep, unbreakable trust by solving an absolutely essential geographic problem for highly isolated communities. Think about it. If a flight is delayed in New York, it's annoying. But if a flight is delayed in a remote Alaskan village, it might mean the town literally doesn't get emergency medicine, mail, or food. Alaska Airlines became a critical piece of human infrastructure, and success often comes from leaning into a problem that everyone else thinks is just way too difficult to even bother with.
Which brings us to part 2, the survival strategy.
They flat out refused to blindly copy the massive carriers. They knew that playing a giant's game would just get them crushed. Instead, they built their survival on 4 really distinct pillars. Number 1, knowing the customer on a relational level, not just a transactional one. Number 2, a relentless focus on operational discipline. Number 3, maintaining a laser focus on the Western United States rather than trying to be everywhere at once. And number 4, using technology and loyalty programs to create an incredibly sticky, frictionless experience.
Let's actually zoom in on that operational discipline piece, because it's essentially the invisible machine that keeps an airline alive when profit margins are incredibly tight. As passengers, we usually just judge an airline on, comfortable seats and friendly staff? But behind the scenes, every single minute an aircraft sits on the ground, it is literally burning money. Alaska Airlines understood that surviving meant perfecting thousands of tiny, daily decisions. We're talking nailing aircraft maintenance checks, minimizing turnaround times down to the minute, and absolutely maximizing route efficiency.
When you compare this to the global airlines, the contrast is pretty striking. The giants chased massive scale, but with that massive scale comes paralyzing complexity. They became slow, process-driven, and just bloated. Alaska Airlines, on the other hand, maintained focused scale. By keeping a regional focus out west, they remained incredibly agile. Decisions happened close to the problem. They never really lost their relationship-driven touch, and that prevented them from getting crushed under their own corporate weight as they expanded.
All right, part 3, surviving global crises.
Because they didn't just battle extreme blizzards and mountain ranges, their corporate history is basically a gauntlet of industry-ending events. They had to navigate the cutthroat deregulation of 1978, where legacy airlines were dropping like flies. Then came the terrifying aftermath of 9/11, which absolutely shattered travel demand. Later on, they took a massive swing with the 2016 Virgin America merger, facing the crazy intense risk of trying to combine two completely different corporate cultures and computer systems without, crashing the company. And then, of course, came the ultimate test, the unprecedented global shutdown of 2020.
Zero. In early 2020, passenger demand effectively dropped to zero overnight. For an industry built on the fundamental assumption that people will always need to move, this was the ultimate existential threat to every single carrier on Earth. Airports were ghost towns. Multi-million-dollar jets were literally just parked on runways doing absolutely nothing.
Surviving this required an absolute masterclass in agility. On one side, they had to balance immediate, brutal crisis survival, cutting costs, reducing flights, protecting their employees. But on the exact same token, they had to engage in long-term future planning. They had to look at this totally frozen landscape and ask, okay, what does the post-pandemic digital traveler actually expect? They relied heavily on that flexibility they had practiced since their wilderness days. So instead of just hunkering down and panicking, they prepared for a totally changed, frictionless digital future.
This brings us to part 4, the adaptability advantage.
If we distill a century of survival down, the absolutely crucial takeaway from this explainer is this. Planes and tech can be bought by absolutely anyone with enough capital. Anyone can order a jet, right? Anyone can buy an app. But a culture? A culture built on reliability, built on respecting the environment, and built on solving truly impossible problems for isolated people, that is an invisible, totally uncopyable competitive asset. It doesn't show up on a standard balance sheet, but it is exactly what influences every single decision a company makes when their back is against the wall.
Alaska Airlines succeeded, not because they had the easiest path, but because they learned from the hardest environment in aviation. They took the harshest, most unforgiving landscape on Earth and turned it into their greatest competitive asset. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this question. What is your frontier? What is that incredibly difficult environment you or your business are facing right now? And are you agile enough to stop fighting it, adapt, and actually conquer it?